He had only $10 in his pocket, and with that amount, he did the impossible. He walked away from an online poker table with $1 million. How? The answer isn't luck, nor chance. It's a mix of boldness, desperation, and one last attempt to turn the game around. It wasn't just a bet, it was a life or death decision. Those $10 weren't for lunch or breakfast, it was all he had. And in a moment of pure adrenaline, he risked it all. While the big bets were happening in Las Vegas or at high-stakes casino tables, he was there, alone, with a cold screen and the pressure of having nothing left to lose. He knew that if it didn't work out, he'd have to face the harsh reality of mounting debts. But what he didn't know was that this simple tournament could change everything. With one bold move, luck turned in his favor. And instead of losing the $10, he won what? Many could never imagine, $1 million. Now the question is, what made this man risk everything? What drives someone to put their last chip on the table knowing that everything could end in failure? This story isn't just about poker, but about overcoming obstacles, courage, and most of all, the chance to change everything with a single move. And that turning point was just the beginning. Before anything else, he wasn't the hero of the story. He was just another face in the crowd, a simple man fighting against the weight of everyday life. His life seemed like a sequence of the same days, where hard work didn't bring rewards and the feeling of sinking seemed to be the only constant. He wasn't someone with big dreams or plans to achieve fame, but a man who just wanted to live, pay the bills, feed his son, and not be swallowed up by debt. He wasn't different from many others who find themselves in a daily battle to survive, not knowing how much longer they could bear the weight of routine without any big expectations. Each day started with the sound of the alarm clock, the bland morning coffee that barely had any taste, and the never-ending work that wore him down even more. His jobs weren't worthy of a biography or a movie, but they were the gigs he needed to make sure his family didn't go hungry. Sometimes he delivered food, other times he worked as a bricklayer's assistant or in call centers. The routine was always the same. Wake up early, work until late, go to bed late, and hope that the next day wouldn't be worse. The physical and mental exhaustion piled up, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the feeling of being trapped in an endless cycle of frustration and disappointment. And the worst part of it all was the lack of understanding from others. His friends, family, even those he called colleagues, didn't understand what he saw in poker. The laughs, the disdainful looks, the comments that he was deluding himself. It all felt like a punch in the gut. No one believed in him, and to be honest, he didn't fully believe in himself either. But what he did know, with absolute certainty, was that this game of chance, was his only escape, his only shot at doing something different. In the few minutes of downtime, with an old phone and a shaky connection, he'd sit and try. Not to win big prizes, but to feel like there was something more, something within reach, something that could finally pull him out of this limited life. The great irony is that deep down, he never sought fame or easy money. The only thing he wanted above all was to ensure a future for his son. The dream was simple, but necessary. A future where he wouldn't have to lie to his son, telling him everything was fine, when in reality, his future felt like a constant struggle against a system that seemed to leave no space for people like him. Each debt that piled up on his table was a reminder that he needed to do more, be more, even think differently. Poker, though dismissed as an illusion, was the only place where he felt his skills, his ability to read the table, understand, the psychology of other players, and take risks at the right moment, might finally make sense. But it wasn't just about betting. It was about something deeper, more visceral. It was about resilience, about the pain of working tirelessly, being exhausted, and still not seeing the reward. How many times did he think about quitting? How many times did the bills pile up to the point where he couldn't pay them anymore, or when the food wasn't enough to last the week? Yet he kept going. Because deep down, there was a spark in his soul, a flame that wouldn't go out. He knew he couldn't keep doing the same things, but at the same time, he didn't know what else to do. Poker was at least an escape, a valve where he felt that the chance to change his life might be just around the corner. The worst part, however, was the judgment. Every time someone told him he was deluding himself, that this wouldn't get him anywhere, something inside him broke. But he didn't complain, didn't defend himself. After all, who wanted to listen to an ordinary man at the bottom of the barrel trying to find a way out? No one. Society teaches us to follow the script. Study, work, live a stable life. But what happens when that script doesn't work? What happens when the traditional recipe for success doesn't work? The answer was simple: you fight. And that's what he did. He fought against everything and everyone, against society's judgment, against skepticism, and even against himself. Of all the jobs he did, the one he remembered most was the feeling of being invisible. Working hard, but with no one noticing. The feeling of being a small piece in a machine that, in his view, couldn't even be fixed. But deep down, he knew something had to change. He knew that it wasn't poverty that defined him, nor the difficulties he faced. What defined him was his attitude in the face of adversity. The real fight wasn't in going with the flow, but in choosing to swim against it. Every step, every gig he did, every sleepless night spent trying to understand how to win at poker, was laying the foundation for what would eventually become his transformation. So this story isn't just about poker. It's not just about winning or losing. It's about being able to rise again, to look at the pain and decide that it won't dictate the rules anymore. He could have given up many times. He could have let himself be consumed by frustration, by the weight of the debts, by the pressure of not being enough. But no, he decided to keep going, because for him, there was nothing else to lose. And in the end, that was the key he needed to start changing everything. Poker came into his life as a last gasp, a chance unnoticed in the middle of an endless night. When you're already at rock bottom, it feels like anything is valid to try, and hold on to not sink. And that's how, in some random moment of his exhausting routine, he stumbled upon something seemingly insignificant. A video on YouTube. Maybe it was a random recommendation. Maybe he typed it by accident in the search bar. But the fact is that the title of a video about poker strategies for beginners made him stop for a moment. A spark of curiosity, a flicker in the darkness. He was tired, completely overwhelmed by the pressure of debts and the constant feeling of sinking without being able to get out of place. He didn't expect to find a solution there, but somehow, this opportunity was presenting itself. He knew absolutely nothing about poker. To him, card games were just an illusion, something some people called games of chance. The concept of strategy was as far-fetched as the possibility of winning the lottery. However, something made him keep watching. It was the kind of video that, when you finish, you wonder if it was really worth your time. But for him, there was something different, something that touched a deep part of his soul. What he saw, perhaps without realizing it, was a glimpse of how intelligence could be more important than luck, and how patience could be the key to winning, even in a tough situation. He felt right there a small flame ignite. Determined to explore this new idea, he downloaded a poker app on his phone. With no great expectations, more out of curiosity than anything else, he started playing with free chips. There was no financial risk involved, just the opportunity to get lost in a seemingly simple game where the cards and luck guided the player's hands. However, he quickly realized that poker was much more than just betting. It was about reading your opponent, understanding probabilities, and making smart choices. It was about making decisions based on logic and perception, something he'd never considered before, especially in a game that many saw only as entertainment. In his first games, he lost more than he won, of course, but even in defeat, there was something he hadn't felt in a long time: learning. Every mistake he made wasn't something to be ashamed of, but an opportunity to grow. He studied the moves, tried to understand what he'd done wrong, and looked for ways to improve for next time. The patience he couldn't find in real life started to develop in the game. He fell in love with the idea that, over time, he could become better, more strategic, smarter than his opponents. What once seemed like a distraction was becoming more and more of a passion. Poker was beginning to transform into a real focus in his life, a kind of refuge where he could channel the energy that life forced him to spend on frustration into something more constructive. The big moment came when, after weeks of playing with free chips, he decided to take a step forward and invest a small amount. Just $10. It was all he had. The kind of bet that seemed almost ridiculous to someone who didn't believe in the game. But for him, it represented a chance to really see if this could be more than just a distraction. He put the amount in the tournament and waited, heart pounding. After all, $10 might have meant nothing to someone drowning in debt. But for him, it represented a risk he never imagined he'd have the courage to take. When he started playing, it wasn't easy. Not just because he was playing with real money, but because of the complexity of the game itself. Poker wasn't simple. It wasn't just about getting good cards or hoping the opponent made a mistake. He would need to use his head, study the moves, watch the other players, and most importantly, understand when to take risks and when to be more cautious. The first games were tough, but surprisingly, he started to do well. What seemed like just an attempt to do something different began to reveal itself as a way to show himself what he didn't even know he was capable of. That small win, $40, something insignificant to anyone else, became the first step of a path he hadn't known he was about to take. It was as if that small amount of $40 gave him something he hadn't seen in a long time. A sense of competence, of control, of doing something right. It wasn't the money that really mattered, but the fact that he had succeeded at something he had, until recently, considered a game of chance. Poker suddenly became more than a hobby. He began to understand that each hand wasn't just about winning, but about understanding the probabilities, the moves, and the other players. And more importantly, he began to believe in his own ability to learn and adapt. The feeling of confidence started to grow inside him. It wasn't an arrogant or presumptuous confidence, but a quiet certainty that he had found something that could be the turning point of his life, something that was within his reach and didn't require years of college or a career full of expensive courses. It was a simple chance, a direct path for those who knew when to take the right risks and learn from their mistakes. The sense of mastery over situations that the game provided began to reflect in his everyday life as well. He began to feel more capable, more confident in his decisions, and that was vital for him to move forward with determination. This first contact with poker was, in fact, an awakening. Not just for the game itself, but for the idea that sometimes, in life, you have to take risks to win. Sometimes you have to take that step without knowing what's next, without any guarantees. Poker taught him that, to change his life, he needed to play with intelligence, with patience, and most of all, with courage. He was still far from being a champion, but what started as a simple distraction had transformed into a survival strategy. And it was in this way, amidst virtual chips and risky moves, that he began his journey. A journey that, he knew, could take him to places he had never imagined reaching. After that first moment of victory, when he won the $40 that meant so much to his life, his confidence grew. The feeling that he had finally found something he could excel at spread like wildfire. Poker was no longer just an escape. Now he believed it was his way out, the key that would open the doors to a new life. But, as with every hopeful path, his was soon hit by the rocks of failure. The losses started to come. And they weren't small. They came with the force of a tornado, and with every loss, the pressure mounted. It was as if life was giving him a clear warning. It's not that easy. The number of defeats grew, and the confidence he had when entering each game began to fade. Instead of seeing the game as a challenge, he began to see it as a fight against his own fate. But the worst part wasn't the financial losses. It was the loss of what he feared the most, the loss of faith in himself. No matter how hard he tried, the situation seemed to only get worse. He'd already been warned, by friends, family, even by himself, that it wouldn't work. "You're deluding yourself. It's just a game of luck," they'd say. And he began to wonder if they were right. Every loss became more painful than the last. Every time the balance of his poker account dropped, a sense of helplessness overtook him. Is this just another mistake? Am I really doing something I can control? These doubts started to gnaw at his mind. Poker, which once seemed like a solution, now made him feel more and more lost. Deep down, he knew this was his last hope, but the doubt spread like cancer. What he didn't know was that he was about to hit the lowest point of his journey, a point where the only option would be to keep going or give up for good. The losses started to take on larger proportions. It was as if the universe was conspiring against him. After a series of consecutive defeats, he found himself in a desperate situation. The debts, which he could once ignore, now demanded attention. The rent, which he hadn't been able to pay the previous month, was now accumulating with interest. The utility bills were overdue. He didn't know where to find the strength to keep fighting, and he started to wonder if his persistence in poker was just another way to escape reality. The weight of each loss was a painful reminder that he was failing, that his choices were wrong, that he was going against everyone who told him there was no future there. The worst came the night he decided to bet what little he had left. At that point, poker was no longer just a game. It was his only chance to turn things around. He was in such a deep hole that he thought, if he didn't have a big win, his only option would be to throw in the towel and start over. He had nothing left to lose. If things continued this way, he'd be homeless and broke. So, with his mind boiling from anxiety, he made the hardest decision of all. He bet $300, what little he had left. If I lose this, it's over, he thought. It was a huge risk, a bet that could either change his life or bury him once and for all. He knew that if he lost, there would be no way back. The risk was high, but he couldn't afford to think small anymore. He sat down, looked at the phone screen, and took a deep breath. The tournament began, and the tension was palpable. In the back of his mind, he knew this could be his last move. He didn't want to think about his previous losses, but they were there, haunting him. The feeling of walking toward disaster followed him with every card that turned on the screen. Each mistake now felt heavier. Every wrong move seemed like he was burying his only chance. But he kept going. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the only way to move forward was to risk it all. Poker required more than just luck. He needed to control his nerves, be smarter than the other players, read their reactions, anticipate their moves. He needed to be more than a desperate man. He needed to be a strategist. The minutes felt like hours, and the tension only grew. When he finally reached the decisive hand, what seemed like a desperate bet turned into something completely different. In a risky move, he made a bold bluff. The other players, who were cautious, fell for the trick, and he won. The victory wasn't just financial. It was a confirmation of what he had felt deep down. He still had what it took to change his life. But at the same time, he knew the road wouldn't be easy. He had just taken the first step in a journey filled with uncertainties and failures. He still had a lot to learn, many more falls to face. But that night, poker was no longer just a game. It had become a reflection of his inner struggle. But he also knew that the biggest challenge was yet to come. Poker is a game of highs and lows, and his fight wasn't just on the card table. The fight was in his mind, in his emotions, in his self-control. The tension, the anguish, and the doubt, which had haunted him during this phase of failure, would be his biggest enemies. What he would learn there in poker about himself would make all the difference in the next steps. He wasn't playing just for money anymore. He was playing for his own redemption, for his own identity. But how far would he be able to endure the falls, the failures, and the pressure? He would only know the answer if he chose to keep risking after everything he had lost: money, energy, sleepless nights, confidence. He found himself standing at a crossroads. It was the kind of moment that separates those who give up from those who are reborn. He could have just walked away, closed the app, sold his phone, tried another odd job, and kept pushing through life. It would have been easier, less painful. Most people would do that. But something inside him, something small, almost imperceptible, whispered, "Try again, but do it differently." And that's when, for the first time, he realized that it wasn't enough just to play. He needed to study, not like someone studying out of obligation, but like someone studying to survive. Because to him, poker was no longer just a game. It was his only real chance to change his life. And this time, he wouldn't play on impulse. He would play with preparation. He started during the early mornings, while the neighbors slept and the city silenced. He was there, immersed in discussion forums, YouTube channels, odds calculation spreadsheets, and long videos of professional players breaking down historic hands. He wrote everything down, paused each move, rewound, analyzed expressions, patterns, decisions. He took an old college notebook and started recording his own plays, mistakes, and successes as if he were keeping a war diary. He read articles on game theory, probability, behavioral psychology. No coach, no bankroll, but he had discipline, and above all, he had hunger. Hunger to learn, to grow, to be better than he was yesterday. It was there he realized that hoping for a miracle wouldn't cut it. He needed to build his own miracle, one play at a time. This immersion phase was silent. No one saw it. While some mocked or said he was getting carried away, he was building his weapons in the dark. That's when he decided to enter smaller tournaments, where the risk was low, but the opportunity to test what he was learning was real. And the results started to show. First, he lasted longer at the tables. Then he started making it to the decisive stages. Until, in a simple tournament with a $5 buy-in, he made his first final table. He made it to the podium. That, to anyone else, might have seemed like a minor detail. But to him, it was the stamp of approval that he was on the right track. More than the prize money, what mattered was the validation. You've learned, you've grown. You deserve to be here. That podium became fuel. But unlike the first victory of $40, which had misled him, this time he had the wisdom to keep his feet on the ground. He knew the game was unforgiving. That one day, you win. The next day, you lose. And because of that, he began to see poker with maturity. He created a study routine, set specific days to play, and others just for analysis. He created his own bankroll management, controlling how much he could risk per tournament and how much he needed to save. He stopped betting on random hands and started choosing tournaments based on the type of player he knew he could face. He was no longer a beginner, but he wasn't a professional either. He was a rising student. And that, by itself, already put him ahead of most. And maybe the most impressive thing about this phase wasn't just the improvement in his game, but the change in the man who was playing. He became calmer, more rational, less impulsive. He started making better decisions, not only in cards, but in life as well. The confidence he rebuilt in the game began to reflect in how he behaved with others. He started smiling more, walking with his head held high. He even started helping other beginners in online groups, sharing his spreadsheets, his mistakes, his lessons. Not because he thought he was better than anyone else, but because he understood the value in extending a hand to someone still on the edge of the abyss. He had been there. He knew the bitter taste of failure. And now that he was learning to walk, he wanted to see others walk too. But the most curious thing about all of this is that the more he evolved, the more he realized that poker wasn't just a card game. It was a game of the mind, of patience, of reading people. It was about observing others' behavior, understanding their patterns, anticipating their moves. The kind of skill that, if you stop to think about it, applies to everything in life. And he used that not only at the tables, but also to negotiate debts, to talk to the landlord where he lived, to face his own fears. Poker was shaping not just the player, but the man behind the screen. And of course, not everything was perfect. There were still defeats, still sleepless nights, still that shadow saying, "What if all of this is for nothing?" But now he knew how to handle it. He understood that growth requires patience, that every real evolution comes from discomfort, and that you can't reach the top without going through the floor first. He was no longer the man who cried after losing a tournament. He was the man who wrote down, analyzed, and said, "Next time, it will be different." He had, at last, understood the value of the journey, and he was ready to go all the way. It was on an ordinary night, with no special shine, just another Tuesday, one of those days when the silence in the house weighs more than the noise. The kitchen light flickered, the fridge let out its constant annoying hum, and the old, cracked laptop screen, still sturdy, lit up the tired face of a man who was about to make history. He didn't know it, of course. To him, it was just another attempt, just another last breath. The kind of move that comes with a mix of faith and desperation. The balance in his poker account was exact, $10. Enough to enter some random tournament with no big promises. The name of the event? Nothing special. The kind of competition many people ignore because the final prize doesn't change anyone's life, unless you turn every cent into a battleground. Before signing up, he hesitated. He looked at the balance, thought about the milk for the week, the bills due in 2 days, his son's bus pass. He thought about quitting, closing everything, going to sleep, forgetting. But there was something about that night, a different kind of silence, an intuition you can't explain, that made him click, register. And when he did, there was no turning back. The chips were on the table. And so was his soul. Because at that moment, he wasn't playing for fun. He was playing for survival. It wasn't about making a little extra cash anymore. It was about winning or falling for good. It was about giving everything he had and trusting that in the middle of the chaos, some improbable play could change the course of the game and of his life. The first hands were tense. He played like someone walking on broken glass. Every card turned seemed like a sentence. But strangely, the calm came with time. His focus deepened. He started to see the moves of others with clarity, as if a veil had been lifted. He began to notice patterns, identify bluffs, use against his opponents what used to make him lose. With every all-in he escaped, every table he advanced through, the feeling grew. I'm ready. I was born for this. It was as if everything he had lived until that night, the failures, the defeats, the late-night studies, was aligning in that exact moment. A cosmic alignment between preparation and opportunity. The tension grew as players were eliminated. From thousands of participants, fewer than 100 remained, then 50, then 20. And there he was, steadfast, eyes burning, heart on fire. Getting into the top 10 seemed like a distant dream just days before. But now, he didn't just want to get there. He wanted to win. And it was at this moment that the play that changed everything came. He was at a disadvantage. He had a weak hand. Any wrong decision would knock him out. But he looked at his opponent's pattern, remembered a similar bluff he had studied months ago, and took the risk. An insane bluff. A move that, if it failed, would end everything. But if it succeeded, well, it would mark the beginning of the legend. He pushed the chips. All in. The table went silent. The round clock seemed frozen. And then came the call. The screen slowly revealed the cards. His opponent had a solid hand, strong, superior. For a second, he felt the ground open beneath him. But there was still one last card to be revealed. The famous river. The final card. The card of luck, of faith, of destiny. And when it appeared, the improbable combination came together. The table flipped. The victory was his. It wasn't just a huge pot of chips he won there. It was the respect of the table, his own self-respect, and the certainty that everything he had done until then hadn't been in vain. From that moment on, it seemed like the whole universe was conspiring in his favor. The hands started to flow. The opponents became more cautious, as if they sensed they were up against something different. He stayed focused. No euphoria, no distractions. He was in war mode, a kind of trance where everything around him faded and only the next move mattered. Hours later, after facing the best, after eliminating favorites, After more unbelievable comebacks, he reached the final, the decisive table. And there, he did what few would do. He kept his cool, bet with intelligence and boldness, and claimed the title, the prize. $1 million. The amount he had never seen, not even adding up all the paychecks he had signed in his life. The sum that had once seemed like it belonged to another world. But that night, it was his. Not by luck, but by everything he had faced to get there. And while the screen flickered with numbers and the victory confirmation, he sat in silence. His hands trembled. Tears ran down his face. The chip, this time, metaphorically, still hadn't dropped. There was no one beside him to celebrate. But there, in that lonely early morning, the man who once thought about quitting had finally won. The silence after the victory was as striking as the final move. The screen stayed on, displaying the prize of $1 million as if it were a bad joke, a system bug. But it wasn't. He blinked several times, leaned back in his chair with his hands on his head, and let his body sink. No sound, no explosive reaction, no movie-style celebration. Just him, the dark room, and the absurd reality that had just been written. It was as if the world around him had stopped for a moment. And in a way, it did. Because at that moment, everything he knew was about to change. But the chip, ironically, still hadn't dropped. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't crying. He just stared at the screen, trying to understand how it all really happened. The first few seconds were filled with almost childlike disbelief. That feeling of, this can't be right. As if someone were about to appear at any moment saying, it's a mistake. You clicked the wrong button, or you weren't supposed to win. And this doubt was part of something much bigger, the history of someone who had spent his whole life trying and almost always failing. His mind wasn't used to winning. He didn't know how to process that kind of achievement. It was as if his brain was trying to update an old system with new software. And while the reality was downloading, his body went into shock. He slowly got up from the chair, looked around the room, took a deep breath, and let out the first tear. But he didn't even notice. It came quietly, shyly, like someone asking for permission to introduce itself. Gradually, the emotion took over. First, his hands started to tremble. Then came the silent cry, the kind that makes no noise but pulls everything from within. It was the release of years of suppressed pain. The overdue rent, the milk counted out, the shame of borrowing money. The nights spent on free forums, the losses swallowed in silence, the "I told you so" that echoed like hammer blows. He sat on the floor of the room and cried like a child. Because it wasn't just the money. It was liberation, the feeling of having beaten the world with a tool that few understood. Poker wasn't just a game. It was math, strategy, psychology, intuition, patience. And he, a man once dismissed, had mastered all of this on his own. With the little he hadn't, and now he had so much. In the following days, the prize was processed. The bank account, which for months barely had 3 digits, now showed 7. 7 figures that completely changed his life. But, contrary to what many would do, he didn't go out buying a sports car, didn't check into a hotel in Miami Beach, didn't head to Las Vegas to celebrate with champagne and strippers. The first thing he did was grab the phone and call his mom. The same mom who had helped him when the rent was overdue. The one who shared her rice when he had nothing left to eat. The one who held him up when he said everything was fine. But she knew it wasn't. He didn't say, "I won $1 million." He simply said, "We won, Mom," and she cried. Next, he paid the debts, every single one by one. He made sure to pay off even the $150 debt at the butcher shop that had been hanging over him for months. He contacted the previous owner of the house where he grew up and bought it back, gifting it to his mum with the deed in her name. Then, he went to the store where his son used to ask for chocolate he could never buy and made sure to fill the cart. It wasn't about showing off. It was emotional justice. It was like rewriting a new story on top of the wounds, rewriting every "I can't" with an "I can now." And more than that, it was an act of healing. Because no matter how powerful money is, it doesn't compare to the relief of knowing that for the first time in his life, he had control over his own destiny. But the biggest changes happened inside. He woke up differently. The weight on his shoulders had lifted. His eyes, which once carried chronic exhaustion, now sparkled. He walked slower, like someone savoring life. He started speaking with more firmness, but without arrogance. It wasn't vanity. It was relief. It was knowing that after so much struggle, life had finally given back, and he didn't feel better than anyone. On the contrary, he felt responsible. He started seeing his path as something bigger, because deep down he knew there are thousands of others like him. Good, smart, hard-working people, stuck in scarcity, in the cycle of bills, of impossibles. And he wanted to be a beacon for them. That's why he turned down easy offers. He declined sensational interviews, reality show invitations, marketing contracts with brands that had nothing to do with his story. He preferred silence. He preferred planning. He set up an emergency fund, hired a financial advisor. He started investing cautiously. He put money in fixed income, then studied stocks and real estate funds. He read books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The Millionaire Mind, and The Richest Man in Babylon. He developed the habit of studying not just poker, but financial intelligence. Because he knew winning is one thing, keeping it is another. And he wasn't willing to be just another guy who won and lost everything story. But still, he didn't distance himself from what built him. He kept playing. Not out of necessity, but out of passion. But now he played in peace, without fear, without the pressure of needing a win to eat the next day. He played because he liked it, because he was good at it, and because deep down, poker had taught him much more than how to move chips around. It had taught him to understand people, to read intentions, to deal with failure, to know when to pull back and when to go all in, both at the table and in life. Every hand he played was a reminder of where he came from and who he had become. When asked by friends how he felt, he answered simply, "It was only supposed to be a last breath. It ended up being my rebirth." Because that's what true transformation does. It doesn't just improve things, it changes the perspective. What once seemed impossible now felt natural, and what once was survival now was purpose. It wasn't about making money anymore. It was about living with dignity, taking care of those who take care of you, looking in the mirror and respecting yourself. And if before he played to escape reality, now he played because he had created a new one. Life after the prize could have followed the classic script of rags to riches stories, flaunting on social media, luxurious trips, imported cars, rooftop dinners with a view of Manhattan. But he chose another path, a quieter one, more conscious, perhaps even lonelier, but deeply meaningful. After paying off all the debts and securing his family's future, He understood that the greatest power wasn't in the bank balance, but in what he would do with it from then on. He didn't want to just be remembered as the guy who won $1 million playing poker with $10. He wanted to be remembered for what he built from that. Because at its core, the money was just a bridge. The real wealth was in what he became, and in what he could offer to others. That's why, instead of distancing himself from his roots, he returned even closer to where it all started. He created a small, discreet social project in a community, similar to the one he grew up in. He started by teaching poker to young people who, like him, had no prospects at all. But far beyond the game, he taught logical thinking, emotional intelligence, focus, patience, behavioral reading, skills that are useful both at the poker table and in real life. The project grew slowly through word of mouth. One kid brought his brother. Another brought his cousin. Soon, mothers started knocking on the door asking, "Can my son learn too?" And he would say, "Of course. Everyone learns here." But he didn't stop there. Little by little, he started creating online content as well. No flashy videos promising to make you rich in 7 days. That was for people who had never seen hunger up close. His videos were deeper, more human. He shared his story with simplicity and truth. He spoke about mistakes, failures, and the days he thought about giving up. And that's what connected so deeply. People saw themselves in him. He received messages from people in Texas, the Bronx, and all over Latin America saying, "Man, you gave me hope." People who didn't want to get rich, they just wanted to breathe. People who saw in his story permission to try again. The most beautiful part is that he never tried to appear as a hero. He didn't put himself on a pedestal. He spoke in the same language as always, without any fluff. He always repeated, "Poker gave me the prize, but it was courage that changed my life." And it was exactly that phrase that became the slogan on the wall of the small center he founded. A center that, over time, grew. It started offering financial education courses, psychological support, and school reinforcement. Nothing glamorous, nothing that would make headlines. But everything was real. People transforming their own stories, not with luck, but with action. And he never forgot the question one of the boys asked him early in the classes. "Do you think I can do it too?" He paused, looked into the boy's eyes, and replied, "If you have the courage to bet on what you believe in, sometimes $10 are all it takes to turn everything around." That boy is now an instructor in the project, and that perhaps was the greatest legacy, not the money, but the movement, the spark, the courage planted in other lives. And now, tell me honestly, would you risk your last $10 in a tournament, knowing it could be your last chip, or the first of a new life? Sounds crazy, right? But that's the challenge this story throws at us. Because what's at stake here isn't just money, it's the willingness to try again, to believe, even when everything around you says it's over. What if this guy had given up the night before the tournament? What if he had believed what everyone said? That poker is just an illusion, that no one's life changes that way. You'd never have heard this story, and he might still be counting coins to buy bread. So, the question is simple, but profound. What's your last chip, and what are you doing with it? You don't need to play poker, but you do need to bet on yourself, on your ideas, your art, your drive to move forward. Sometimes the world won't give you space, and you'll have to create your own. That's what he did. He took the only thing he had and used it as best as he could. He studied, he messed up, he fell, and came back hungrier than ever. This applies to anything in life. Starting a business, changing careers, reinventing yourself. And most importantly, don't wait for the perfect moment. He didn't have top-notch equipment, comfort, or support. He just had courage. And if he did all this with $10 and an old phone, what's stopping you from taking the next step with what you have now? And before you leave here and let this story fade into the past, think about this. Which move do you think defined this journey? Was it the final bluff? The moment he cried on the floor of his room? Or was it when he decided to study in silence, when no one believed in him? Drop a comment below. I want to know what hit you the hardest, and more. Go ahead and share this video with someone who's at their breaking point, someone who's about to give up. Because for that person, this story might be the push they needed.